Welcome to the deep dive, where we kind of, deep dive into stuff.
Hmm.
Today it's all about AI in journalism, which is blowing up right now.
Yeah, it's everywhere you look.
And this Newsnet tool is leading the charge. They say it can write and fact-check news all by itself.
Bold claims for sure, raises a ton of questions too.
Exactly. Like, are we just chasing speed here, or could we be, losing something more important along the way?
The integrity of the information.
Yeah.
That's the core issue, right? Speed versus integrity. And it's a debate playing out in some interesting ways. For instance, people who are pro-AI in journalism, they say it could change how we cover those data-heavy stories, like sports scores or financial earnings.
Oh, yeah. Like, instead of waiting for a human to type out all the, box scores or whatever.
An algorithm could do it instantly.
Yeah.
And that frees up human journalists to do more in-depth work.
Right. So more news faster.
Yeah.
And potentially even more local news, which is something we always need more of.
Absolutely. AI could cover every local election, every school board meeting, all those things that often get missed because newsrooms are stretched too thin.
That all sounds good in theory. But what about accuracy and, bias?
Yeah.
Newsnet says it can fact check with super high precision, but how does that even work?
Well, that's where things get a bit more complicated. See, most AI systems are based on something called machine learning.
Machine learning, okay.
They're trained on huge data sets of text and code, and they learn to spot patterns and make predictions based on that data.
So if the data itself is biased, then the AI could just make things worse, right?
Precisely. And even if the data is carefully curated, there's still a chance for algorithmic bias.
Algorithmic bias.
Meaning the algorithms themselves can reflect the biases of the people who created them or the biases built into how they were designed.
So it's not just about the data, it's also about the AI itself.
Right.
Okay, so even if we figure out how to deal with those concerns, there's still the question of the human touch in journalism. That ability to connect with readers on an emotional level, tell stories that make an impact. Can an algorithm really do that?
That's a huge question. A lot of people are wondering about that. A journalist doesn't just report facts. They provide context. They make ethical judgments. They connect with their audience on a human level. So can AI really replicate all of that?
That's a tough one. I mean, think about a time you read a news story that really moved you, that changed your mind about something. It's hard to imagine an algorithm having that kind of impact.
Yeah, and that leads to the question of public perception and trust. Would you trust a story written by an algorithm?
I honestly don't know. Maybe for something like sports scores, where it's just about getting the data out there quickly and accurately. But for anything more complex, anything that requires, interpretation and analysis, I think I'd still want a human involved.
And you're not alone. People are divided on this. Some are excited about the possibility of faster, more efficient news, while others are worried about the potential impact on accuracy bias and the future of journalism as a profession.
You know what's interesting, though? One of our sources talks about a local news outlet that started using AI for sports reporting, and people loved it. It was accurate, it was fast, and it allowed them to cover way more events than they could before.
That's a great example of how AI can be a really powerful tool when it's used in the right way. And it shows that this isn't a simple black and white issue. There are a lot of nuances, a lot of trade-offs, and it's about finding the right balance.
So maybe the question isn't, is AI good or bad for journalism, but rather, where does AI fit in and where does it, fall short?
Exactly. And that's a question we need to keep asking as the technology keeps changing and evolving.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating, dilemma. On the one hand, we have this incredible potential to revolutionize how news is produced and consumed. But then on the other, there are those concerns about accuracy bias and the integrity of journalism. It's like we're at a crossroads trying to decide which path to take. Do we embrace the speed and efficiency of AI, even if it means giving up some human oversight? Or do we stick with the traditional values of journalism, even if it means, potentially falling behind in this fast-paced digital world?
And it's a tough choice. There are valid arguments on both sides. Some people think that AI can actually help reduce bias in news reporting.
I thought we were saying how AI could make bias worse because it's trained on data that's already biased.
Yeah, that's true. But the counter argument is that AI could be programmed to be more objective than humans.
Yeah.
It could be trained to spot potential biases and then flag them for human editors to review.
So instead of replacing journalists altogether, it could be used as a tool to help them produce more balanced and objective reporting.
Exactly. It's about finding ways for humans and AI to work together to create a more informed and trustworthy news ecosystem.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But even if we solve the bias issue, can AI really replicate the creativity and intuition that human journalists bring to their work?
Hmm.
I mean, think about the stories that really grab our attention, the ones that make us think differently about the world. Those are often the result of a journalist's unique perspective. Their ability to connect things and tell stories with real human emotion.
That's a good point. A lot of people who are critical of AI in journalism say that AI just doesn't have the capacity to understand context, to make those kinds of connections, and to tell stories that resonate with human emotion.
Like, take investigative journalism, for example. Those stories often require, digging deep, cultivating sources, and piecing together really complex narratives. Can AI really do that?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine AI replicating that kind of in-depth investigative work. It relies so much on human intuition, judgment, and the ability to build trust with sources.
Because it's not just about, crunching data or analyzing patterns.
Hmm.
It's about understanding human behavior, the motivations and complexities that drive people.
Exactly, and that's something that even the most advanced AI systems just don't have yet.
So where does that leave us? Are we stuck with this either situation where we have to choose between the speed of AI and the depth of human journalism?
I don't think so. I think there's a middle ground, a way to use the strengths of both AI and human intelligence to create a more well-rounded approach to news.
So how do we find that sweet spot where AI helps journalism without hurting it?
It's going to take a lot of experimentation, collaboration, and open-mindedness. We need to be willing to try new things to see what works and what doesn't, and to keep adapting as the technology changes.
And we need to have these conversations about the potential risks and benefits of AI in journalism like we're doing now.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, the future of news is something we all have a stake in. We need to be engaged, informed, and actively involved.
So for those of you just joining us, we're taking a deep dive into this whole debate about AI in journalism.
We've been looking at both sides, the potential benefits of AI, like increased efficiency, and then the concerns about bias accuracy and the human element.
And we talked about that case study where a local news outlet used AI for sports reporting, and it actually worked out well, which shows that AI can definitely have a positive impact.
But like with any new technology, there are ethical questions and potential problems we can't ignore.
Right. And speaking of potential problems, we were talking about Newsnet earlier, that tool that claims to be able to write and fact-check news.
Yeah, Newsnet is a perfect example of the kind of AI tech that's got everyone talking, some excited, some worried.
Because on the one hand, it's pretty amazing that an algorithm could potentially go through all that data and figure out what's true and what's not.
It could definitely speed up fact-checking and maybe even find errors that humans would miss.
But then how do we know that Newsnet or any other AI fact-checker is really unbiased?
That is the million-dollar question. Because even if the algorithms are designed to be neutral, the data they're trained on could still have hidden biases.
So we're back to that problem of AI making bias worse instead of better.
Exactly. That's why we need human oversight in the process. We need journalists and editors who can look at what the AI is doing and make sure it's accurate and objective.
Because it's not enough to just have an algorithm telling us what's true and what's false. We need human judgment to understand that information, to give it context, and to make sure it's being presented fairly.
Absolutely. And that brings up another important point, the potential impact of AI on the role of journalists.
Right. If AI starts doing things like writing basic news stories or fact-checking, will we even need human journalists anymore?
Some people think that's what will happen, but I think it's more likely that AI will help journalists do their jobs better rather than replacing them.
So instead of being afraid of AI, journalists could use it as a tool that frees them up to focus on more complex and creative work.
Exactly. AI could handle the more routine stuff like gathering data and doing analysis, while human journalists could focus on things like investigative reporting, in-depth interviews, and writing compelling stories.
And that could actually make the media landscape more interesting and diverse, because journalists would have more time and resources to pursue stories that really matter.
It's an exciting possibility, but we also have to be realistic about the potential downsides of AI in journalism.
Like what kind of downsides?
Well, one concern is that if news organizations rely too much on AI, we might start seeing the same kinds of stories being covered in the same way by different outlets.
So less originality and creativity.
Right. And another worry is that AI could be used to create and spread misinformation even more effectively than humans can.
That's a scary thought,
Yeah.
especially if someone with bad intentions created an AI system just to make fake news or to manipulate social media.
That could really damage public trust in the media and make it even harder to know what's true and what's not.
So it sounds like AI in journalism is a double-edged sword.
It is. It has the potential to be both really helpful and really harmful.
And it's up to us to figure out how to use it responsibly.
We need to talk about the ethical implications of AI in journalism And we need to create safeguards to make sure it's being used for good.
Because the future of news is important, and we all have a role to play in shaping it.
Well said.
Mm.
And on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today in this deep dive into AI in journalism.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and for joining us for this important conversation.
Remember, the decisions we make about AI in journalism will have a big impact on how we get our news and how we understand the world.
So stay informed, stay curious, and keep asking questions.
And if you want to learn more about this topic, check out the resources in our show notes.
And don't forget to follow @AI for the People for more on this and other AI topics.
Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring.